this section is one I was really looking forward to because of the fact that, you know, even though my grandpa was part of the 853rd, the 853rd had their own reunions for a while. And as they merged with the Rohna organization and started to attend here, he made a couple of reunions before he passed away in 2005. I didn't really get involved with the organization until about 5 years afterward. And so this, for me, this was a great piece of information about how this organization began, who founded it. And I really learned a great deal about our founding members. So I hope you guys all enjoy this and we will get started. Deb, the floor is yours.
Well, hello everyone and welcome back for those of you who left, and hello again for those of you who remained. The year 2020 was certainly a unique one for all of us, and it was for the rest of the world as well, I expect. Unfortunately for the Rohna organization, we also lost that year the last two organization founders and original board members, Ruth Canny and Gus Geekus. In recent years, Gus and Ruth had pretty much become synonymous with the Rohna organization. If you said their names, the Rohna wasn't far behind. They'd actually become our very own in-house celebrities. As many of you know, Ruth is the reason that we have these reunions today. If she and Charlotte Clontz had not continued on after that first gathering, and Ruth alone after Charlotte was gone, we wouldn't be having these reunions today, I don't think. Gus sat on the Rohna board since day one. He helped steer our decisions and guide us with his wisdom and his insight. And he held steadfastly to the reason for this organization's existence, the men of the Rohna. There are many of you who attend the reunions today, and you know little or nothing about the founding members. So at this time, we would like to pay tribute to them and present to you the founding and original board members of the Rohna Survivors Memorial Association.
Dr. James G. Bennett was a marriage and family therapist and author of several publications. Jim lost his brother, PFC.
Hello. I just wanted to say I have to leave pretty soon, but I'm still on Zoom if you want to come in.
Jim lost his brother, PFC Robert O. Bennett, on the Rohna. He and his family had very few details about how his brother died when he was growing up. On Veterans Day, 1993, Jim's clock radio woke him up with Charles Osgood's morning talk show. Osgood was talking about the sinking of the Rohna. Jim wondered if that had something to do with his brother, but upon fully waking, he put it aside and went about his life. 2 weeks later, on November 26, 1993, he once again awakened to the Osgood show. And again, Mr. Osgood was talking about the Rohna. This time Jim listened, and then putting the pieces together, he investigated further. He obtained contact information for John Phoebut, and John confirmed that his brother was indeed on the Rohna. After numerous phone conversations with John, Jim and his wife Louise attended a CBI reunion in December 1994, where he brought a tape recorder and asked the survivors if he could record their stories. They then attended the 1995 reunion. He did the same. Many of these interviews, plus his own personal story, are the subject of his book, The Rohna Disaster, World War II's Secret Tragedy. Jim's book is the basis for the History Channel's documentary by the same name. Jim and Bob Brewer worked with U.S. Congressman Jack Metcalf and Senators Baucus, Gorton, and Murphy on the House Concurrent Resolution 408 bill, which was passed by both the House and the U.S. Senate in October 2000. This piece of legislation is the only federal government recognition of the Rohna tragedy to date. Jim was the organization's publicity director. He was also responsible for creating and maintaining the first Rohna survivors website. Dr. James G. Bennett lived in Shelton, Washington. He passed away January 10th, 2015.
James C. Blaine lost his brother, Sergeant Franklin W. Blaine, on the Rohna. At the 1994 CBI reunion, Jim Blaine and Jim Bennett met, and it was there that they coined the phrase next of kin for themselves, which they shortened into the acronym NOK. The acronym stuck and is used today to differentiate the next of kin of a casualty from a survivor family's member. Jim Blaine was one of the key people in getting the Rohna Memorial erected. The Department of Veterans Affairs requires that a memorial be channeled through an established veterans organization and requested by a next of kin. Jim took on the responsibility of requesting the placement of a memorial at a national cemetery on behalf of the organization as a next of kin. Jim also helped John Fevitz search for a veterans organization to sponsor the memorial, but none could be found. So the Rohna Survivors Memorial Association came into being. Although it took until 1999 for the formal adoption of the Articles of Association and bylaws, the organization itself was already formed. James C. Blaine was a carpenter by trade. He lived in Laverne, California. He passed away January 2nd, 2000.
Michael, you're muted.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean that makes a difference? Here we go.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. It was really good too. Colonel Robert M. Brewer, United States Air Force retired, served as president of the Rohna Survivors Memorial Association for the first 5 years after the association formally adopted its Articles of Association and bylaws. Bob was a first lieutenant at the time of the Rohna tragedy and stayed aboard the sinking vessel, helping other men off the Rohna before jumping into the Mediterranean himself. When he returned home in 1946, he went to college and then returned to active duty in the United States Air Force. Bob worked on the House Concurrent Resolution 408 bill with Jim Bennett to get recognition for the Rohna and the Pioneer. He also assisted Ron Wright, keeping on task to get the current articles and bylaws written and passed. In 1994, a year there was no organizational reunion, Bob and his wife Etta hosted a small gathering of Rohna survivors near his home to help keep people connected. Bob was awarded the Bronze Star in 2001 and the Purple Heart for injuries suffered in the attack on the Rohna in 2002. Colonel Robert M. Brewer retired from the United States Air Force after 28 years of service. He lived in Stockton, California, and passed away March 21st, 2013.
William Caskey was a private in Transit Unit A1 826A at the time of the Rohna sinking. Gut Gickus was his first lieutenant in command. Bill, like all others who started this organization, wrote letters and made phone calls, reaching out, trying to locate survivors and next of kin. His efforts resulted in many more people learning about the organization's existence. On December 27, 2000, Bill, along with survivors Bob Brewer, Al Stefanoni, was interviewed by NBC nightly news anchor Tom Brokaw for a segment titled Home of the Brave. The national coverage was welcomed by the Rohna Association and seen by many. It helped shed light on the Rohna tragedy to a national audience. Bill was awarded the Purple Heart 50 years after the fact for injuries he received during the Rohna sinking. He wore it proudly every day for the rest of his life. Bill Caskey had a long career working at Bagshawn Brothers Carpets. He lived in Clayton, California, and he passed away February 2nd, 2013.
John P. Canning, was not only my father, but also Jane Downing's father. And he was one of the first to start the letter writing, information gathering campaign, trying to learn about the Rona tragedy. He spent countless hours sifting through numerous government documents, trying to establish an accurate list of casualties. A byproduct of this effort was the accumulation of the names and addresses of the many survivors and next of kin. Throughout the years, many of the next of kin had tried to get information regarding their loved one, only to be stonewalled by the government. My dad, however, had learned that you need to know the correct name and or number of the desired report you are seeking. This knowledge enabled him to access many documents when others couldn't, including some personal ones for the NO case. He was also involved in the CBI organization, writing letters to the men of the Rona, encouraging them to participate in those reunions. He was a quiet man who often worked behind the scenes, accomplishing much for the Rona organization. When the Rona went down, he had 3 coins in his pocket. He carried these same 3 coins every day for the rest of his life. In fact, by the time of his death, they were unrecognizable. They were in his pocket when he was laid to rest. John P. Canny was a psychologist and worked his way up to be the deputy director of the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections. Originally from Boston, Mass., he lived in West Jefferson, Ohio, and he passed away October 15, 2001.
Ruth M. Canny was small, but a force to be reckoned with, and my grandmother. When she set her mind to something, nothing got in her way. When my grandfather, survivor John Canny, started researching the Rona tragedy, ultimately finding many of the men on the Rona and the next of kin, she was right there with him. She knew all too well the pain of loss from World War II, as she had lost her brother, Clifford Goodnow, 19 years old at the Battle of the Bulge. And she had also lost her brother-in-law. Ruth was a great organizer and record keeper. She spent untold hours at the computer creating the first database of survivors, casualties, NOKs, convoy members, and anyone else involved with the Rona. This database is now the current day Rona survivors mailing list. Because both my grandparents and the Quants felt a gathering of all who were impacted by the Rona tragedy was long overdue, they decided to host the first Rona reunion. It was held in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, September 1993, commemorating the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Rona. No reunion was held in 1994 or 1997, but as of 1998, the reunions became an annual event, organized and overseen by Ruth. It was after the first reunion that she created her first of many legendary scrapbooks. They are ginormous and a wealth of information of the memories for all to enjoy. Upon the creation of the formal Rona organization, Ruth was made a director emeritus. After my grandfather, John, had passed away, she also became a board member. She was a graduate of Northeastern University at a time when many women could barely complete high school. She lived in West Jefferson, also a native of Boston, and passed away June 16th, 2020.
Janice, you're muted.
Hello?
Hello,
Can you hear me now?
we can.
Okay, good. I unmuted myself. I don't know what happened. Anyway, all right, very quickly. Sorry. James G. Cluntz had been looking for survivors off and on for over 30 years before the first Rona reunion actually took place. Like many of the original board, he couldn't let go of the fact that the Rona story had slipped off into oblivion. He and his wife, Charlotte, typed letters to all the major newspapers in the US and in fact, actually two in England. They asked if anyone had been in or seen the action on November 26, 1943. If so, to please get in touch with them. This led to the accumulation of a large collection of names and addresses of Rona survivors, next of kin, and also convoy members, many of them in England. In 1993, Jim and his wife Charlotte, along with John and Ruth Canny, who were also writing letters, combined their list, wrote invitations, and hosted the first Rona reunion in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. It was at this reunion that Jim finally met and was able to thank Harold Jones, the red-headed sailor of the USS Pioneer, who had saved his life. Jim was also instrumental, with the help of then US Representative Newt Gingrich, in getting a number of documents associated with the Rona tragedy declassified. Throughout the years, that original combined address list, which Jim helped create, had grown larger and now includes email addresses. But it is still the association's working mailing list. James G. Klontz worked at Lockheed for over 40 years. He passed away January 7th, 2016.
John P. Fevitt Sr. essentially created and was the very first president of the Rona Association, albeit on paper only. This came about because he wanted a monument for the fallen men of the Rona. The requirements set forth by the Department of Veterans Affairs are that a monument be requested by a next of kin and sponsored through a veterans organization. John set to the task of creating a constitution, bylaws, and officers for the Rona Survivors Memorial Association to satisfy the veterans organization requirements. Jim Blaine, as a next of kin, made the formal request for the monument. The memorial, however, was financed by all who wanted to participate. Once the memorial was dedicated in 1996, the association that John created was dissolved, as he had always intended. The current association's bylaws and articles of association were created and established within the following 3 years. At that time, he became a director emeritus for the association. Years earlier, after John had talked an Associated Press writer into writing an article about the Rona, the article went out on the AP wires and appeared in numerous newspapers across the nation. This article caught the eye of Charles Osgood and became part of his morning show on Veterans Day, 1993. Then, on November 26, 1993, the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Rona, Charles Osgood told the story again as part of his show, The Osgood Files. John also wrote an article that appeared in American History magazine in August 1994, which informed the public about the Rona. Many families of casualties either heard the Osgood shows or read one of the articles Jim had written in the early 1990s and realized this may be the ship their loved one was on. It is how so many learned about the Rona. This is also how a number of convoy members and survivors learned that the reunions and the organization existed. These are just a few of the many things John did for this organization. John P. Fevitt Sr. was a senior buyer and consultant for U.S. Steel. He lived in Birmingham, Alabama. John passed away November 21st, 2010. You're muted, Cynthia.
Donald A. Fortune was the organization's news editor. He was the only original board member who, although originally assigned to the HMT Rona, was not part of the convoy the day of the sinking. His unit had been loaded onto the Rona, but it was determined to be overcrowded, so his unit got bumped. And he was assigned to Rona's sister ship, the HMT Regula. As luck would have it, the Regula developed engine trouble and couldn't depart with the convoy. Don wrote one of the first books about the Rona, as well as several newspaper articles throughout the year. As the association's news editor, John would send out press packets in advance to the local newspapers, radio, and TV stations in the towns and cities where the Rona reunions were held. This was done weeks ahead of the gatherings. It let local folks know about the upcoming reunion as well as the press. At some point during the reunion, a reporter or two, sometimes a television crew, would appear to talk with some of the survivors. This was how the organization achieved one of its goals, to get the word out about the sinking of the Rona. Don A. Fortune was an English and journalism teacher and a newspaperman. He spent 21 years as a reporter and editor for the San Francisco Examiner after a brief time in the classroom. He lived in Pleasant Hill, California. He passed away March 3rd, 2011.
Colonel Gus N. Geikus of the United States Air Force. He's retired, was a first lieutenant in the Army Air Corps at the time of the Rona sinking. He was the designated commander of 4 officers and 234 men at Goldsboro, North Carolina, just a few days before shipping out to Oran, Algeria. Once Gus was rescued and aboard the USS Pioneer, he helped guide others who had been rescued to the lee side of the ship, out of the wind, and assisted taking the wounded to the wardroom for medical attention. Gus did the same for the Rona organization. He guided the organization with his sharp mind and critical thinking to achieve its goals of finding, by all means, the families of those who had succumbed and make them aware of the events of that day, and to foster further, by reunions and other communications, the closeness between the survivors. Like the other original board members, he spent time reaching out to the families of both survivors and casualties to talk about the Rona. He was the last founding and original board members. Colonel Gus Geikus retired from the United States Air Force after 28 years of service. He went on to become a teacher and a potter of some renown. He lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and he passed away on September 22nd, 2020.
Janet, you're muted.
Okay, I'm gonna start again. Carl Schoenaker graduated from NYS College of Agriculture and Life Science at Cornell University. He held 2 jobs before embarking on a 21-year teaching career at Romulus Central School. Carl was the first executive secretary of the formerly organized Rona Association. He was also the newsletter editor after Don Fortune was no longer attending the reunions. Throughout his time as the organization's secretary, Carl was of great assistance to then Association President Bob Brewer. When Bob could not attend reunions, Carl stepped up and handled the annual meetings and events on his behalf, as there was no vice president. Energetic and friendly, Carl liked helping people find out information about loved ones. He even assisted Noakes with getting a memorial placed in Arlington Cemetery. He and his wife, Ruth, were the only non-family members at the dedication. In 1996, at the dedication of the Rona Memorial, Carl was one of the speakers. Towards the end of his speech, he said, "I have never asked why I'm so dedicated, but I have been reminded that I do not have to do this." Later, he summed it up by saying, "It is simple. I live, therefore I owe." Carl and his wife, Ruth, lived in Waterloo, New York. Ruth passed away at the age of 100. Carl passed away June 16th, 2011.
Robert Ronald Wright Jr. was the helmsman of the USS Pioneer. On the evening of November 26, 1943, when general quarters sounded at the beginning of the attack, Captain Leroy Rogers went to the flying bridge to control the Pioneers' battle action. His only orders to Ron were, "Okay, right, zigzag like hell." Ron steered the vessel throughout the attack, including outmaneuvering 4 glider bombs. However, during the Rohna rescue, he requested and received permission to leave the bridge to assist, as he felt he could be of more use there. According to a letter Ron wrote to members in 1999, it bothered him that there was no official organization. The association that John Fevet put together in order to erect the memorial dissolved in 1996, as was intended. After the 1997 reunion in St. Louis, Missouri, Ron conceived a starting point with the suggestions and help of other men who became the original board members. The current Articles of Association and bylaws were created. In February 1999, the Articles and bylaws were accepted by the association's majority. Robert Ronald Wright Jr. was a certified public accountant who lived in Palm Desert, California. He passed away March 27, 2006.
Although Charlotte Clontz and Catherine Fevet were never board members, we would be remiss if we didn't also pay tribute to them and the contributions that both of them made. Ruth always said that Charlotte was one of the main reasons that these reunions happened. She did a tremendous amount of work gathering names and addresses and co-hosting those early gatherings. Catherine Fevet played just as large a role in bringing both the association and the memorial monument into fruition. She was actually the very first secretary treasurer of the association. Although only on paper, it happened when John formed the association for the purpose of establishing the monument. Both of these women played important roles in the reunions and the making of this organization. Hopefully you've liked a look back at the men and women whose foresight formed the foundation for this organization. It is their hard work and diligence that built the foundation of the current Rohna Memorial Survivors Association. It's now incumbent upon us to continue their work and honor their legacy. I would like to personally thank Michael Walsh and Janet DeLude for their time and research, and also Janice Pamulia, whose editing helped to make this segment possible. And now, because we cannot take pictures this year for our usual photo book, we're going to show you a photo book of reunions past. And it begins with the first reunion in 1993. So sit back and relax, and we hope you enjoy this brief stroll down memory lane.